Welcome to the MBA series. This is a special multi-part series within Next Economy Now. We are going to review the arc of the learning journey that is presented in the Next Economy MBA online course. We are open sourcing the content from our course and hope to share it in this shorter, bite-sized format. We are launching this series because we were asked to do it by listeners like you. We're also doing it because we are writing a book entitled The Next Economy MBA, Redesigning Business for the Benefit of All Life, which will be published on May 23rd, 2023 by Barrett Kohler Publishers. This is a sizable series. There will eventually be 18 podcast episodes of course content and 9 interviews with MBA alumni. We will be rotating every other week with our normal Next Economy Now interview format. We hope you enjoy it. Please reach out to us via our website, lifteconomy.com, with any comments, feedback, or requests. And now, on with the show.
I am Sean Berry, a partner at Lift Economy, and today my guest is Mosa Tsay. Mosa is a Taiwanese-American cellist, first-generation artist, and community organizer. She is a worker owner of Groupmuse, a cooperative that organizes house concerts. Since her studies at UC Berkeley and the Juilliard School, she has combined her interests in environmental sustainability and music to create hyper-local partnerships between musicians and local businesses to listen local. She is executive director of Groupmuse Foundation and has been focused on uplifting artists, cooperativism, mutual aid, inclusive concert programming, and economic independence through grassroots fundraising and grant making. Welcome, Mosa.
Hey, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. And I'd love to invite you to start by sharing how you got interested and involved in the work you're doing today.
What a question. It's been a long and winding road. When I started out playing music when I was 7, I just never really imagined that being a musician in today's society would lead me to think about how music is an interconnecting force, like a thread, connecting all of us in our cultural experiences, but also it plays a part in our roles in the economy, whatever economy that we're in. That arts has existed before stock markets. And so we have to unpack that a little bit, and never imagined that I would be at an amazing worker co-op called Groupmuse today. So I'll just kind of bring us back to 2013. I had just finished my undergrad studies at UC Berkeley. I double majored in music and environmental science and was really wanting to combine the two somehow. Didn't know how, but I got to know one of the co-founders of Groupmuse who had just moved to California. And Kyle Schmolzy, he said, "Hey, what do you think about house concerts?" And I said, "Oh, I would love to." And the first house concert I played at was in a frat house, but it was a Christian frat house next to the UC Berkeley campus. And we served root beer because it was a dry venue. And it was awesome. We turned down the lights, we played some Beethoven quartets, and then just fast forward, I've been through a couple of roles at the co-op now, and now I have been a member of a steering committee, as well as I have founded a parallel nonprofit to just cover more work that we want to do within the community. So it's just been such a journey, and I'm looking forward to just diving a little bit into some of those topics that I work on and think about every day in my roles.
Thanks, Mosa. Yeah, I really want to hear more about this transition from performer, right, which is its own depth of discipline and personal commitments and profound respect for the artistry and the bravery and the study that goes into that. So I'm curious to hear more about that transition from performer, because I think if I have it right, you're one of the Groupmuse 100
I did.
Plus,
I
right?
am one of the rare musicians who's played more than 100 house concerts through Groupmuse. Yes.
Yeah, not a minor statistic there. So, and I'm assuming you're still an artist and a performer, right? So, how are you holding both those, and how did you get into the staff side and the worker owner side?
Yeah, so I'm a cellist. I started playing cello when I was 7, and I really have to thank my parents for seeing that our lineage and among my ancestors, there weren't many artists. One, because most of us couldn't afford it. This was a time of economic depression in Taiwan. It was hard to make a living. And so most of my ancestors have been farming, have been doing shops, creating shops, mom and pop shops. And it was a real departure from my lineage to actually become a musician. And I remember there being some tension there. So I actually started performing from a place of needing to make rent. I started playing group muses because it was hard to make rent in San Francisco Bay Area as a newly undergrad, a recently graduated musician, but without some kind of music conservatory to my name. So I think I kind of fell into this community of house concerts in that way, but it grew to a greater understanding of what it means to build community. So the role of an artist is to bring people together. And in these days where we have so many forms of technology encouraging us to actually stay remote and stay disconnected, to constantly compare ourselves with others, that experience of playing all these house concerts where I was literally meeting every single person. That was always my goal upon entering one of these spaces, is by the end of tonight, I'm going to know every single person's name. I'm going to know their likes, their dislikes. I'm going to know enough about them that I will be able to play a concert for them next time that attracts what they want to hear. I'm going to figure out how to get them back. And that was great. So from there, I was really, really fortunate to get a chance from the Groupmuse founders. After I finished my studies at Juilliard, I had an injury that prevented me from entering more deeply as a performer in this musical community that's so tight-knit and so welcoming. And if you have an injury, it was just one burden, to just kind of work through. So I thought, well, I want to do something that I like too. So, hey, Groupmuse team, do you have any need for anyone, any musicians who can bring in a unique perspective as someone who's done a lot within your community, brought hundreds of people together, people who've never heard classical music, never heard live music in non-traditional settings. Do you want me to do something and contribute that skill set? And they were like, yes, we need someone in San Francisco. So that's where I started to do the staff things. I started to help organize concerts on a larger scale. I started to recruit hosts to host these house concerts. But then I had to take a break. The pandemic happened. Sean, I want to kind of mention, I think, the foundation side too, because that's a big part of my history with Groupmuse.
Yes, please.
I was abroad at the time of March 2020 when the pandemic just really changed everything. I looked around and I saw that in the US, my musician friends were really struggling at a different level from my European musician friends because of the simple disparity of services that are available for most people. So I saw the fear and the anxiety of what will happen when all of our gigs, all of our thousands of dollars of expected income disappears. What is going to happen to us? And so I started to mobilize my community to try to raise funds for artist emergency grants, enough to get them by and enough to fill in the gap until the government had a larger assistance set up. So Groupmuse Foundation came out of that desire, and I had called Sam, one of the founder of Groupmuse, and he said, yeah, heck yes, let's do it. And so since 2020, I've been directing this, and it's been a beautiful journey to use the nonprofit platform to do things in a co-op way. So I'll stop there, but lots of learning experiences. Not everything's the same as being a musician trying to attain that perfection on stage, but I'd say a lot of overlap too. Yeah, thanks for asking about that. It's been an interesting journey to reflect on.
Let's hear more about the foundation. So what was the foundation able to do for musicians during the pandemic? Kind of what were some of the things you were able to achieve?
I will boil it down to three things that we have been really striving to do. First is to create jobs for musicians. And in doing so, this is my personal form of contributing to a universal creator income, UCI. Having lived through being a freelancing musician without the guarantee of if I'm sick and I cancel a gig, I just simply won't get paid that day, that week. And that made me live in fear a lot of the time. So I didn't want my colleagues in the music world or the next generation to go through that the way that I had to. So I'm really proud that we have created over 10 part-time administrative jobs for musicians within the Groupmuse community. That's been a major win. Number 2 would be to make sure that the minimum payment for all musicians across the board for Groupmuse events all across the world, all across the nation, that it's not under $100 a musician per performance. Now, that's still not enough, I have to say. I would love to see that double or tripled for a performance of such high caliber. But for now, we had done the math, and if we had to pay out for all events that were occurring, that was what we could afford at the moment. So that was great. No longer do musicians have to worry, oh my gosh, am I going to have to trek an hour on public transportation, make only $45, which will mean I'm actually negative for the evening. Now they don't have to worry. So then number 3 is to increase the diversity and inclusion element of our programming, because Sean, classical music can be so exclusive and so Eurocentric. So within Groupmuse Foundation, we tilt the scales and we do a lot more to make sure that the programming that happens on groupmuse.com's calendar reflects the diversity and the beauty of all the different cultural experiences and different cultural musical histories that we as a world have seen and appreciated. So yeah, these 3 things, I think we have begun to achieve them and have continued to just see new possibilities. So hopefully it will be more than 3 in the coming years.
For folks who maybe don't know, when the pandemic hit, classical musician employment and performance in this country was pretty much over. Is that correct?
Correct.
Like none of the symphonies, there was no concert halls, nothing was happening. Well, and if I'm correct, that's also when your platform went from house concerts to streaming, right?
Absolutely. We were one of the first, to do that. It was kind of a moment of things have changed. We have to change with the times. And I think it was within 3 weeks of when all concerts around the world were canceled and musicians were twiddling their thumbs at home, we said, hey, well, we know about Zoom and we have a website. We have always worked remotely as a team, so we are well equipped to just convert everything on our website to Zoom concerts. And I remember those first couple online Zoom concerts, the musicians walked away with at least $1,000 each. People were just giving, and you could see this beautiful flow of resources, of funds, of people's hard-earned money going from audience to musician, and that kind of grassroots and immediate artist support. We were so excited about that. Yeah, within a year, we would help generate over $150,000 in income through these online concerts that year and every year since then.
So you actually... Yeah, so it's not just on the foundation side, you created, some admin jobs, but you actually created performance opportunities, and it sounds like well-paid ones during that hard time for everybody. And then also you're able to get to the music into people's homes and ears when we were all separated and needed that connection. So that I love that innovation that you're able to do as a small team. Tell me more about, is it called Planetary Music?
Correct.
Right, because I've, personally, I've been way more interested in, for example, classical Indian music is just so profound and powerful for me. And I've gone much deeper into ethnomusicology and all these other traditions around the world that have been, no offense, but they've been around way longer than the European academies and such. So what's that kind of movement? How's it looking to try to open up what's been a very Eurocentric space to these, what I would call, enhanced traditions?
Absolutely. For us at Groupmuse, the intention and the desire to move away from Eurocentric concert programming made us realize how beautiful all the African and traditional instruments. We weren't seeing them at Groupmuses and in-house concerts prior because the space to enjoy that kind of music was in a public space, actually. So we had to learn a little bit about the traditional spaces one might hear that music. And so we had to kind of really learn and educate ourselves and ask for advice from our musicians in the community. Is a house concert environment appropriate for your music? And do you feel like it will lend itself to have a very attentive and respectful audience for you? And most often, these musicians said, yes, I can actually share a little bit more and speak a little bit more about the music instead of playing it on the subway platform in New York City. The space really matters in how we listen to music. And so Planetary Music Movement, which is Groupmuse's efforts to shine the light on all these other types of music besides classical music, classical Western music. Yeah, we have an Indian classical Groupmuse coming up in December in Los Angeles. We are currently working on, a Turkish oud program, presenting that in the San Francisco area. So there are a lot more of these concerts happening. And I love seeing when someone who I know who's at a Groupmuse because of their affinity for classical music, like the Beethoven, composers, will go up to a musician who's playing something that is not from Europe, and they'll say, I had no idea this music existed. Thank you so much for opening my eyes and my ears. I am now going to have enough context and enough knowledge about your tradition, your studies, your context that you've provided us tonight. And I'm going to go and research that. I'm going to go listen to that now. And so, Sean, I just feel like this was a beautiful conversion of ears that had to happen. So I'm really happy about this shift in our programming.
Do you see your community of listeners responding? Like, are these type of performances as popular as other ones, or is it you're still building a market for it?
It is popular, and we're also bringing more people into the Groupmuse community, which was always the question we were asking ourselves. Are we restricting ourselves to a certain demographic by presenting only Western classical music? And I have to say, I'm sure the answer was yes. And so now we're able to have everyone come together who are interested in listening to live music that go back over 100 years or so with some history that we can learn together. It's just been an amazing thing to witness because live music touches all hearts and all ears.
And are you seeing outside of just Groupmuse, is there a broader movement around, Western music being more expansive or inclusive? Or
I can only comment on this community that I've been such a big part of, and I can witness, the real live data and the numbers on our website, event attendance, for example. Mm-hmm. I do have to say, I think Groupmuse may have been faster to recognize our role in the Eurocentric issue of classical music. And I hope that, it's an ongoing conversation. It wasn't an easy one, for sure. We had to untangle and really examine, why do people uphold music by European composers who lived, 100 years ago? Why is that better than music composed today by Black or Brown, composers? And also, does someone have to identify as a composer for their music to be played at a house concert? Can we unpack that? What are these labels, right? What are the labels of even music genres? We often hear our team will say this, genre is obsolete. And some of us do really, really hold that space, and others hold that space a little bit less. So we're constantly holding that balance too within Groupmuse. I won't comment on the larger classical music, I think, culture, because there's a reason I am working for Groupmuse, because I believe in all of these values that we hold, and I'm not currently working at a larger classical music org anymore.
Oh, fair enough. I asked because I have no idea and figured you might have more insight. Let's go back to Groupmuse. And so I have a little bit of knowledge, right, since I know your team, but so when Groupmuse was founded, it was not a cooperative. Can you share more about how did that transition happen from privately held, privately run company to a worker cooperative? And then next we'll get to the musician council.
Absolutely. In 2019, when I joined the team, I joined a team that was very much run like a startup, let's say a tech startup even. By then, decision-making was already a little bit more decentralized than I had expected a startup to have. But in 2019, Groupmuse was still a founder-led and founder-owned company. So the conversion happened in 2020 because of the pandemic. causing all operations to not only speed up and really grow because of our move to present online concerts, but also it gave us time and space to finally put into action things we were talking about for years, things that the founders were talking about for years about making group music co-op. So in the spring of 2020, we came to Lift Economy, and Sean, we really, really loved your advice and your stewardship of our conversion to a worker co-op, because it could be daunting to try to reimagine and redesign everything. But incrementally, we were able to go from the very ground level and just start to reimagine what Groupmuse could be with a worker-owned organization. So, some of the things that we learned to do was to set our own salaries through a very, very transparent co-budgeting process, and really had to train myself, for example, because this was new to me, how to use the advice model, how to establish trust with my colleagues, and to talk about a lot more things transparently than one might do at a traditional tech startup or a traditional arts nonprofit. So all of that was an amazing journey to have as a team. And now we are a team of 9 worker owners and over 15 musician owners. So that's what you're alluding to, right, Sean? The Musician Council. Yeah.
Right. So first there was a transition to worker co-op, right? Yeah, just centered in the fact that Groupmuse exists to support musicians, right? It wasn't like a stopping point to make the staff, the owners, right?
It was just one stop on the train. The next stop was to really make Groupmuse a musician-owned platform as well. We now are a multi-stakeholder cooperative, and one stakeholder group is, of course, the worker owners, which is the staff who do the administrative and operational work of presenting house concerts and establishing partnerships with local arts organizations. And then we have the musician owners, and their leadership entity is called the Musician Council. They meet monthly and discuss things that only musicians would really understand within Groupmuse, such as how is it feeling to be paid a certain amount at Groupmuses. So they discuss these things, and then they bring that information and share back to the staff so that we can help implement and we can help execute some of these requests that they may have. But this was a really crucial shift to start having musicians' voices at the table. I want to say a little bit about how the traditional music nonprofit might be structured. And from my own personal experience and from what I observe, these other organizations often have an artist versus administrator dynamic. And it's just natural. It's a natural dynamic to have. But at Groupmuse, I like to think that we are trying to take away that opportunity for that tension to come up by simply having the musicians centered in all of this more, by having them be able to vote, by having them have a say in how we budget things, by having them have a budget. This was a major decision to have them have control over a musician council budget, because within the music world, within the arts world, within the nonprofit world, funding is power, and we wanted to share that power. So we wanted to share that funding.
It's relatively recent, but can you share any examples of what's different now that the musicians have a seat at the table? Have they requested or done things that would be different than what the staff would have done for them?
That's a great question. I think what I've seen happen is that when we invited musicians to have a seat at the table and to let them know that we are listening to what they want to say and what they recommend to us, the staff, the worker owners, I've seen them take ownership, true ownership of the direction Groupmuse is heading, of certain decisions that Groupmuse is taking. And they're also contributing ideas way more than in the past because there wasn't the trust before. They didn't have a way of guaranteeing that the ideas they share to us aren't just going to be exploited or they're going to be left out of any of these amazing ideas that they bring to us. So there was a certain level of protection, let's say, of creative capital. But now when they are at the table, they know that when they share their creative capital, they're going to see it return back to them in perhaps more opportunities to perform, in perhaps more income through these house concerts, and perhaps also additional project grants, because a continual investment in each other. And when we see that, when we, the staff, see that the musician owners are investing in Groupmuse, we are inspired to invest even more back into their artistic endeavors. And so recently, the Musician Council approved, and after designing a process to have access to project grants of $500 each, I am so happy to and looking forward to their events that they're going to present thanks to this $500. A lot of these events wouldn't have happened if they didn't have this upfront funding to take care of some of these expenses. In another world, they would have had to cover these expenses out of pocket and possibly be in the red after the concert is over. So I, on the staff side and the worker owner side, have seen a blossoming of this relationship with them. And I also hope that they have seen a parallel blossoming in their imagination for what Groupmuse events could be for them.
The invitation, which is a brave invitation, right, to invite a whole new class of ownership to an organization, has created trust that has opened the door to more sharing and more creativity. So this idea of like pre-funding micro grants to encourage different performances or creative events that either would have been done out of pocket or at a loss, or just based on sheer inspiration, are now being like preemptively funded and supported by the direction of the Musician Council.
Yes, and I think it's been an invitation for these musicians to lean on their creative programming sides. Each of these musicians I respect and adore so much. They have so much to bring to audiences, and I hope that they just view Groupmuse as one of many platforms. We don't want them to feel like we're just taking over their whole bandwidth. But I feel like, yeah, we're really kind of chipping away at this zero-sum idea that many musicians may have about gig life.
So what's next from Groupmuse? What can we expect, or what are you working on, or what is the future? Maybe are you hoping for, or what do you see coming?
Lots of good things, I hope. Now that it's 2022 and we imagine more live concerts being possible and there's more people being more comfortable about gathering again indoors, we're really hoping to see a lot of our cities around the US come back. For example, before the pandemic, we had community managers in each of these cities. So we're going to bring that back. We're seeking some funding, and we are having some great conversations with partners in New York City and in the larger world, and are really enjoying being part of a larger cooperative movement. During the pandemic, we were rather insular because we just felt like there was so much work to do and there was a lot of reimagining of our world. But now things have settled. We're becoming better. We're learning a lot more and are getting better at being a worker co-op. So the next step is to connect our worker co-op with all the other co-ops and to really be part of the larger picture here, because the arts can be siloed often, right? Like it's such a abstract concept, and oftentimes artists and the arts can be elitist, and we want to break down that completely. A true community can only have cultural richness if there are people within that community who can afford to be artists. So I think what's next for Groupmuse is to continually create that possibility for an echelon of musicians who otherwise would have to find another job or would have to subsidize their creativity with some other form of art and cultural work. So yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more house concerts. As always, we're going to see a lot more part-time jobs for musicians. We're going to see a lot better artist pay and a lot more music coming from all over the world.
Oh, I love it. And you mentioned the wider movement. So what are you seeing in the wider cooperative, or, we use this term next economy movement to just kind of refer to all the solutions that are coming forward, not just cooperative, right? So yeah, what are you seeing in the movement of co-op, arts, next economy?
In my own research, I've come to realize that cooperativism really comes as a response to something. For example, the wine co-ops emerged after a disease wiped out a lot of the grapevines in Europe. For us as musicians, I, for example, shared about cooperativism and use cases from agriculture and real estate, included Groupmuse in that sharing to the Juilliard School recently. And because in music conservatories, we are simply not taught that there is another model out there besides corporation that's profit-driven and possibly exploitative. There's also the nonprofit world where you have to rely on patrons and donors. There can be another way, cooperatives being one of them. So I'm seeing a lot more artists being interested in the co-op movement, which is great to see. I also have noticed that in response to a greater frustration over lack of systemic support and infrastructure for musicians who are not established yet, I'm seeing a lot more musicians understand, oh, I can't just practice all day. That's not going to get me a sustainable career as an artist. I can't just focus on myself. I need to uplift my colleagues, because by doing so, our whole community will be uplifted. We will live to perform many, many more concerts. So in terms of the next economy playing a larger part in the arts recovering from the pandemic, I think time will tell, but I'm pretty hopeful and optimistic.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I love this change in perspective, right? Instead of just me as the heroic artist and my music's so amazing, right? And I just need to put it out there, rather than looking to the community of artists and how do we lift up everybody so that there's more art, there's more music, there's more beauty in the world, which is, of course, we need that now as much as ever. What are some of the big challenges you're facing? We heard some of the wins, it's amazing. You've kind of, have this staff collective, you have the musician council, you've been able to bring this music to people, maybe coming back more in person soon, which is wonderful. So yeah, what are some of those hard challenges? Or another way we ask the questions, like what's keeping you up at night? What's really the deep problem? And I hope you sleep well and are not kept up at night, but you get the idea.
I only have to listen to some music and then I sleep like a baby. I stay up sometimes thinking about what it might take to translate some of the concepts from the next economy to musicians, to donors, to funders in the art space who are traumatized. I feel like there's a lot of trauma in the nonprofit world and among musicians, so we can't hope to do anything to change the status quo if we don't address that first. That hurt, the fear and the anxiety of not being able to make a living as an artist, all of that has to happen perhaps on an individual basis for each musician. But for the most part, I think about that translation. How can I encourage my musician community to think about something beautifully collaborative and uplifting as a co-op if they're just wanting to make enough money to make rent this month? So the scarcity mindset, that can be a challenge, I would say, ahead of those of us in the Groupmuse community or those of us in the co-op movement in the arts, because that is real. And I hope that by addressing those immediate basic needs first, as Groupmuse is trying to do by just raising the bar on minimum musician pay for house concerts, I hope that little by little we can bring in these musicians who are so used to living on adrenaline, on financial adrenaline even, that they can be invited to reflect and see some new possibilities they otherwise wouldn't.
Does this connect? Earlier you were saying the UCI, right? The Universal Creative Income. Is this kind of, it's not just the healing from trauma, it's like we actually have to create this safety to start to heal, right? Like you're saying, the financial adrenaline is not actually healthy, right?
The safety net has to happen more, I would say. And all of the organizations who have access to funding, instead of sitting on that funding, I feel like a lot of us could really try to activate that funding and send it directly to the pockets of artists who need it. I also see another challenge that is playing out, which is this top-down direction of funding, of arts funding. There is a lot of funding that's allocated and restricted to the arts, but by the time it gets to the artists on the ground, it's breadcrumbs. So I'm not saying that administrators don't deserve a living wage and a competitive wage. I don't say that at all. I really do believe that people should be compensated for their great and important work, but perhaps there's another way. Perhaps there's another flow of funding that we can explore. And so this audience to musician direct flow of funding that we at the house concerts are doing. We pass around a bowl and collect cash for the artists and say 100% of this goes to musicians who are performing tonight's Groupmuse. I'm hoping that we are addressing this by setting up another form of how funding can flow within the community of audiences and musicians.
There's something, thank you for sharing. I'm reflecting on just kind of how refreshing it is, that scale of the money. I'm in the room, I heard the concert, I put the money in the hat, I get to meet the person. It's very relational, it's very rich, as opposed to the funding kind of trickling through these different structures and eventually a little bit is getting somewhere. And, we're all grateful for that. There's some things there, but yeah, it just strikes me that there's so much more abundance in this kind of direct connection model. And it's actually, the money is there, but my sense, and I've actually been to some Groupmuse performances, right? I had a much more meaningful experience than just the contribution of the $20 bill into the hat, right? I learned things, I met people. Yeah, I was exposed to new music, new ideas. So just how rich it could be, right? The abundance and multi-yield that's coming out of the engagement and the exchange that you're setting up.
Yeah, this abundance that you're speaking of, I learned what the framework that I currently now view this through is the non-monetary exchanges that are happening constantly at Groupmuse events. What you just spoke of receiving so much from these musicians beyond the music itself. You may be receiving their friendship if you're chatting with them. You exchange numbers. You want to support them more by going to more of their concerts. You're meeting some of your audience members as well, who are sitting to the left, right in front of you. You're also sharing food and drink together. It's a real sense of just multi-directional giving. And I love that. 100 or so Groupmuses later, I still go to Groupmuses that I'm not, organizing, because I crave that sense of connection. And that exchange is so rare to find now. Everything's boiled down to dollar signs. And I have to say, even though we at Groupmuse try to make all of the invisible work that artists do, we try to, put some visibility on that and try to put some dollar signs on that. We also have seen the beauty of this non-monetary exchange that's always going on. So, yeah, I hope you'll come to more Groupmuses, Sean. There's always more music to explore.
Oh yeah, you invited me recently, but want to get more happening up in the Hudson Valley my way.
We'll make that happen.
Yes. As we're wrapping up here, what do you need right now? How can our listeners, we have this robust network of listeners and Next Economy contributors. How can they help you in your work?
You can help by finding a Groupmuse house concert near you. And if there isn't one, you can host one. It doesn't take a lot. We really believe that anywhere 10 people can gather, live music can happen. And we have seen Groupmuses happen in every kind of space, dorm room with a cellist sitting on the bed and everyone sitting on the floor, or a ginormous distillery where everyone's sitting on these barrels. So we do hope that everyone can see themselves as a host of live music, because it used to be reserved for these princes and princesses and the churches, but anyone can really hear music right in front of them. The other way is to find a musician who might be living in your neighborhood, who you might know as a friend, who you might know as a friend of a friend, and just start attending their concerts. That direct support of artists in your local community is what keeps these artists going. If you don't have the resources to give them, $100 or so every time they play a house concert, that's okay. Whatever you can, $3, $1, buying their Spotify album or iTunes album, all of that goes toward their career and their livelihood. So I just want to encourage all of us to see ourselves a little bit more like arts patrons in all the different skills. I mean that with a pun intended there, because we have skills in music too.
Yes. And so where would people find? Can you share, I guess, website or social?
Please head on over to groupmuse.com. And on the website, you'll see a calendar of all the events going on. There are some, most in New York City, some in San Francisco. But like I said, if you don't have one in your city, you could host the first one.
Well, Mosa, thank you so much for your leadership and generous contributions to not only the arts, but cooperativism and an economy that works for all. Really appreciate you. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Sean, for having me. Thanks all.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.